I'm Bonnie Toland. I work with Callison at TKL, and I do mostly workplace design. I actually started with Callison in Dubai, so I bring that experience into my Seattle practice as well. Oops. So when thinking about workplace, it's really, I think, interesting to consider what work is and how work is evolving as a cultural, a huge component of our culture and of our society. I think a lot of times we take for granted that the way things are the way they should be. And so I started thinking about, well, historically, what has work been? And what do we want it to be? What is the ideal for work? What would we want to feel like when we go to work? What kind of space would feel good? And how can we make it feel better? So I was looking historically, and really our workspaces, our offices, were developed during the Industrial Revolution, and they're very much paired with the factory. And this actually ties into schooling really closely too, because schools were also tied to the factory. So it's just like this, what do you call it?
Grade line?
Yeah.
And grading system too.
Well, everything. I mean, it has to do with how we think about time, what we consider productive, and what we consider, like, so they really aren't that different from each other. And what's interesting too about this is that this is sort of a baggage that we carry along with us into our current culture, and it is relatively culturally specific mostly to the US and to the UK, but it's also one of our biggest exports. We're exporting it globally without considering whether that's really the best way to do things or not, because we don't really even reflect on it. We just sort of accept that that's how it is. And we're groomed for it from a very young age. Like you were saying, there are a lot of things about schools that haven't really changed. So if you look at our offices today, they're just not that different than the offices of the industrial era. And it's holding us back in a lot of ways. We're not able to live up to our own potentials. And I think it's hurtful to most of us. And I think it's also particularly hurtful when we think of ourselves and generationally being groomed for a particular way of working. And so that gives some people an advantage, even if it's hurtful to everyone, it gives some people an advantage in that kind of an environment. But if you don't have a generational model of being groomed for that, then it's even more hurtful, because people don't have parents and grandparents who went through the same grooming system, so to speak, if that makes sense. So there are a lot of things about our current way of doing things that are becoming archaic very quickly. And sometimes I wonder what's going to happen, like, in the future when archaeologists look back at our workplaces and they're going to question, like, why would people go and close themselves in a box for 8 hours a day? Why would they do that? And
why would they do that to kids?
Why would they do that to kids? But that's the only way they can do it to adults, is because they've done it to them since they were little, so they've been conditioned to accept it and to think that this is normal human behavior, which I'm not convinced that it is.
Totally.
Yeah. So with all of this in mind, and as someone who designs for work, I wanted to interview people and try to figure out what their ideals would be. So I started interviewing people in Seattle across different sectors, asking people about their work experiences and what they loved and what worked the best for them. And I've just begun. I have about 15 interviews. I want to do more. It's so fascinating, and I'm getting these patterns that some are predictable, some of them would make a lot of sense, like everyone is wanting connection to nature. And the way that the stories that they say and the way they express it are really beautiful. Like one lady was saying how, you're lucky if you have an operable window, by the way, in your office. Most people don't. So she was saying that she has a window that she can open, and that she's sitting there at the desk and she has this little breeze come in and it flutters the papers, and she's like, oh. She just got excited about it. Because, that people are saying they want to be connected to their senses because they feel so disconnected. Like one guy, he says, they could put my brain in a jar and connect it to the computer and they'd be happy. This is how he explains his work experience. Because people want to feel like their whole self is included in their life, and work is such a big piece of our life. So how do we make that better integrated? It's like you were saying, I think someone said that all our values are reflected in the spaces we design. So if those are our values, I think we really need to question our values. So, but ultimately what people are saying the most, hands down, is that they want to connect with other people. They want to feel like they're acknowledged, that they're heard, that they are seen, and that can see and acknowledge others. So, I don't remember the story. I was going to tell you an anecdote, but I can't remember it now. But they want to be able to express themselves. Like, if people are talking about the need to share who they are in like an expressive way, and how do we create spaces that can support that. So these are the themes that are really running strongly in my presence here on the panel. We're less tethered to our desks, and in fact, I'm seeing the end of the desk because when we're talking about workplace, we often have these set components that we use, and we think we have it all figured out. But because even recently we were in India, and one of our clients says, he's on their leadership team, and he says, it's like, well, I don't understand. If we don't use our monitors and we don't use our desk phones, what's the point of the desk? And it's our devices are becoming smaller, we're becoming more mobile, so I see that as a turning point in a way. I think that we're scrambling, we look to big data to try to solve these problems, and so we're looking at what is okay, this chair sits vacant 70% of the time, and we try to glean from that, how to design the space. And I think that's part of why I wanted to do something more qualitative, because it's not just about this is 70% vacant. Like, how do we get into what people are actually experiencing and feeling, and what really does work for them better? And in workplaces, we are expecting more from them, because of this model and the way that it's worked, our social ties have really weakened, and so we're looking to, I think, our work to give us some of that support that we might have otherwise gotten from an extended network or an extended community. So that I think that work, and perhaps schools as well, have to consider that, like, how do we support people fully, considering, like you said, that maybe they don't have those social networks. I was asking a young woman in India, like, well, what was your education system like before the British? And she's like, I don't know. And it was like, well, I'm sure you must have had some way of transferring knowledge, because you have a lot of brilliance coming out of this continent before the British were here. Like, you have poets and writers and beautiful literature. So there was something happening here, but that you don't remember. There's something very sad about that. And I was talking with my fiance too about how it doesn't take very many generations to lose something. Like, if you were talking about language, you'll lose it within a maximum of 4 generations. Usually it's like your first generation, you will speak it, second generation will understand it, but the third generation is gone.
And from our earlier conversation we met a week or 2 ago, I was really captured by this notion that we touched on about, do designers sometimes try and solve too much? And is that in some way inhibiting innovation on the part of the building user?
Yeah.
And is there some sort of balanced approach, or some sort of reasonable restraint, in a way, that you apply when you're designing a space to really create those opportunities for innovation on the part of the user, and help sort of,
Bonnie, you spoke pretty well about that, and the notion of the end of the desk, and so what do you do with that? What does that space become?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, just to go back a little bit, that's exciting, I think, that's happening in workplace, and that's kind of in some ways freaking everyone out, is that there's all this new co-working space everywhere. And so now it's like they're redefining what a workplace looks like, and everyone is scrambling to sort of catch up, I think. And there was a quote I read about, I can't remember which one, it was an early co-working space, and he was saying, like, we're not competing with other offices, we're competing with people's homes.
That's true.
Which is, I thought, interesting.
Yeah, so true.
And then the other thing we're talking about, what you're saying, that's so important, to looking into these different ways that you can connect across disciplines and stuff. One of the people I interviewed, he was talking about his favorite workplace or work experience, by the way, nobody has ever said that their favorite workplace or work experience was in an office. It's not, so far it's not been one office experience.
Oh, in your surveys?
Yeah, in
Oh,
my,
yeah?
in my interviews, no
Yeah,
one
yeah.
has said office. Go figure. Anyway, he was saying that in his favorite work experience was this one where he had to engage with the community around designing schools, and that he had to go out into these different community spaces to get feedback about what would work for the school design. And we both were reflecting, and it was interesting because like, a lot of times those are the types of activities that get cut out of a program or a schedule, because people don't see a direct, like, where's the product, where's the fee, where's the this, where's the that. You don't, some of it is a little more amorphous, and so it's easy to disregard it as being not as important. And we're looking at each other, but that's where the real work is.
Yeah, right.
And so that real work, like you're saying, is making those connections with the brain labs and making those connections across these things. And maybe no one will ever pay you for that. You know, maybe no one will ever recognize that that's valuable and important. But that's really the most important stuff that we can do.
And a responsibility.
We think we're so smart. Like we think we can plan for all these people are going to use a space like this. And part of it, like we want to predict too much. We think, you know,
Right.
and some of the best design is very, very simple because the users can figure it out. They can figure out how
Intuitive design.
Yeah, to make it work. And that actually some of the buildings with the most longevity are this very simple structures. Like it's not about like I'm a designer. I'm gonna make this cool space that does all this stuff, and it's like
And
make it simple.
Why do we love the hill towns of Italy, right? They're unpredictable.
Like there's some times when we don't even get to go to observe. It's so important, like to be in a space, to observe how people are using it, how people are interacting. And sometimes, like you'll get inspiration from such a tiny thing that there's no way you could have gotten that from the photos that they sent you, or you know what I mean? Like you have to be in that space and feel it, because like you said, design is a very emotional experience. It's a sensory and emotional experience, and so you kind of need to put yourself out to get that.
I think in terms of schools and the sense of a desk that you graduate to when you go to work, and you have a larger desk, or even a rectangular classroom, to me it kind of gets into a psychology of your space and marking your space.
Oh, right.
And when you talked about the Montessori piece, to me it's like valuing the internal, where you don't have to have this space that defines you.
Right.
You really define yourself.
I wanted to, like, there's something, you said something that's so right on. Like, I was reading about prison, spaces in prison and how people demarcate space in prison, specifically in areas where they're in dormitory settings, they don't have their own cells, and how they create what's called, like, what they're terming prosthetic cells. So like I'll put my chair here, and that becomes an extension of me, and don't you dare touch my chair, because then you're touching me. And I think we do that in our workplace, and that's sort of where the struggle is with the desk and getting rid of the desk, is because we see that desk as an extension of like this is part of me.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Have you seen flexible works? Have you seen flexible classrooms yet? Have you been? Okay, I observed some classrooms within our research study for arts integration, and one of my favorite classrooms to go to is this teacher who has brought in like 20 different kinds of chairs.
Oh,
and then when I come in, they're like skittering about and like putting like, oh, somebody's on a bonsu ball, and there's another person on like a camp chair, and you can see that they're still actively working, and some of them are actually on the ground with their like elbows and stuff, but they're claiming their environment, and they seem to be more self-efficient, more confident in their decision making.
They're making decisions.
Even if it's the
about their
moment of
space.
opening up a chair, that's a decision.
Yeah.